James Bell of the Boxing Source here with another video, and this video here is to talk about Terence Crawford in the welterweight division. And it goes into him being a so-called boogeyman in the welterweight division. And, people are talking about how certain fighters within the welterweight division were kind of sidestepping him or ducking him at welterweight. But here's a question that is posed for those that kind of say that. Why did Terence Crawford choose to fight Jeff Horn for the WBO belt? Okay. Reason why I say that is because with that moniker of Terence Crawford being the boogeyman of the welterweight division, why is it that he didn't put himself in position to fight for any of the other titles that the other fighters had? At that particular time, you had three different fighters with world titles that were not under Top Rank but were under PBC. And of course, there was the whole talk about Crawford possibly fighting Errol Spence, right? And a lot of people were talking about Errol Spence ducking Terence Crawford. But here is my question to that. If Errol Spence was really ducking Terence Crawford, and why didn't Terence Crawford go ahead and choose to fight for the IBF mandatory spot? Remember, he was the undisputed super lightweight champion. So when he moved up in weight, he could have chosen to be the top contender for any of the world titles that were out there. Now, he could have fought the number one contender in the WBC, the number one contender in the WBA, or the number one contender in the IBF. And he didn't do that. He could have forced the hand of those world title holders that were there at that particular time. But he didn't end up doing that. He ended up getting himself in a position to fight for the WBO welterweight championship, which at the time was held by Jeff Horn. And when he did that, he basically wanted to get that WBO title and then just defend that particular title. He got that immediate world title shot against Jeff Horn instead of putting himself in a position to be a mandatory for one of those titles that the people in PBC had. You had the instance where, I bring up the thing with Golovkin kind of forcing his hand to become a mandatory contender for the WBC belt. Here in this case, you had Terence Crawford as an undisputed champ who could have fought any one of those other title holders at that particular time or put himself into a position to become a mandatory for one of those titles. I can give an example. Alexander Usyk, undisputed cruiserweight champion. When he moved up, he basically chose his way to be the top contender for the WBO belt, or be put in a position to be the top contender for the WBO title. Another example of a fighter that isn't or hasn't been an undisputed champion but was a world champion was Jermall Charlo. Jermall Charlo was the IBF super welterweight champion, and then when he moved up and fought for the mandatory spot for the WBC middleweight championship. So, with that being said, Terence Crawford had that option available to him to fight for the mandatory spot in any one of those other sanctioning bodies, but didn't do it. Now, you'll have people that will say that Errol Spence said, go get a belt, go get a belt. Well, in this instance, the only main reason that one would probably go get a belt is to make the fight bigger than it could possibly be. But even so, if you really want to force his hand, you go ahead and you fight the mandatory contender for the IBF title and force Spence's hand. A lot of fans want to bring up the thing about Canelo or Cotto, quote unquote, ducking Gennady Golovkin when Gennady Golovkin tried to pull what he pulled with the WBC interim belt. Well, if you can use that, then use the thing with Terence Crawford where Terence Crawford could have fought any of the other guys that held a world title, or he could have fought to be a mandatory contender for one of those titles, and then he would have forced their hand in order to fight him or give up the belt. And that's it. If you want to prove that someone is ducking you, become a mandatory contender when you don't have any of the belts, and then force their hand to where once that mandatory is ordered, then they have to fight or relinquish the belt. And Terence Crawford did not do that. Will we have Terence Crawford eventually fight Errol Spence? That will most likely happen. But you can't have this thing about saying that Errol Spence was ducking Terence Crawford when Terence Crawford had the option to force the hand of Errol Spence and fight for the IBF mandatory position when he moved up from super lightweight to welterweight, and then he could have made the fight right then and there. But he didn't do it, so there it is. That's all I got in reference to the particular topic. You could subscribe to the Boxing Source on YouTube or catch the Boxing Source radio show live 7:30 Sunday nights. Blog Talk Radio. Catch the podcast on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, whatever your favorite podcast app is. On that note, folks, I'm out. Peace.